Well, this one made me sit down and think for a while. Alright guys, back again with another review. This one is of The Boy and the Heron, which is the latest Miyazaki movie. This is another one he's made after he said, this time for realsies, I'm retiring, but I'm coming back. But comes back a few years later because, I don't know, I've heard tell it's because his son's not a very good replacement for him, which I honestly feel kind of bad for. And this movie feels like partial meta-commentary on, but I'll get to that in a little while. This is The Boy and the Heron, which is his latest movie, and it is, by Miyazaki standards, it is a fantastic film, like right off the bat. This one is very much like the best Miyazaki, and I'm not saying I'm like an avid Miyazaki fan. There's a lot of his classic movies I'm still kind of catching up on. I only recently watched like Howl's Moving Castle. I only finally like started to watch not too long ago. So like, don't take me as a Miyazaki uber fan that knows all his like filmography, because I'm just not that guy. But I just know, like, as someone who's maybe not as experienced as others with his filmography, I can state I don't know where this ranks on it. I just know that I loved it. This was a very meditative film, beautiful film, both just in the designs of the worlds it builds in typical Miyazaki style, but also in the story it has to tell, which does draw from his typical roots and drawing from like World War II iconography or World War II stories, and the wild imagination of fantasy, and especially fantasy through the eyes of a child. This movie, for those who aren't aware, stars a young boy named Mahito. And by the way, before I saw the English dub, mostly because I was just curious about Robert Pattinson's performance, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But Mahito is a young boy who lost his mother in a hospital fire in the middle of the war, middle of World War II, and as a result, he's at that stage where he's too old to be a kid, too young to be a man, kind of thing. Like, this is the kind of traumatic event that forced him to grow up much faster than any kid ever should. And for some reason, even though, like, I super relate to this kid, I don't really know why. It's one of those movies where I'm like, I feel for this kid. I recognize this behavior. I don't get why I'm the one recognizing that. And I should probably talk to my therapist about it. But I'll say a lot. I'll deal with that in a future time. But like a couple years after his mom passes away, his father remarries to what turns out to be his mother's sister. Make of that what you will. His father, played by Christian Bale in the English dub, is kind of a war profiteer. He makes like armaments and supplies for the Japanese military, and they kind of move out to this nice, kind of secluded estate. On this estate, there is this unusual heron that flies around that seems to take a particular interest in Mojito, and eventually reveals himself to be like a magical bird that, by the way, whoever designed this fucking thing made the initial appearance of this bird fucking terrifying. And I have a massive amount of respect for it. The design of this bird alone is fantastic and really creative and unpredictable. See where it goes until you see it. But anyway, this boy, played by Robert Pattinson, who, again, like, I know I shit on him a lot for the Batman, but that's no disrespect to the actor himself. Like, Robert Pattinson, God bless the man, whether it works or it doesn't, makes big swings, and I have a huge amount of respect for him for that. And boy, does he make a big swing here. I guess it was his first ever voice role, and he kills it. He crushes it. He makes this incredibly back of the throat voice work for him. And he's like, he makes it really endearing, and he makes it really creepy when he needs to be. He makes it really it's a practically perfect performance from him, and I respect the hell out of it. But he serves as a guide. He basically says, like, hey, your mother's not dead. She's actually down this tunnel over here. Why don't you come meet me there? And the kid, again, who is forced to grow up way faster than he's had to, and has also been this entire time been navigating this really uncomfortable relationship with his future stepmom, is like, knows it's a trap, like knows that the bird is full of shit, but he just has to know. So after creating some armaments for himself, he eventually travels down there, travels down there with him, and gets locked in this fantasy world that is largely run by killer parakeets. And while he's at this world, he goes on a journey of self-discovery and reconnecting to himself and kind of finding out what he is and who he is in this time of his life, because there was definitely no going back to the kid he was before his mom died, but he also in a place where he needs to find a way forward so he can still live his life. It's a very curious balance and a very curious story about expectations and about inherited burdens and choices that weren't ours to make that we now have to live with. It's a beautiful story. The animation, as should be no surprise, is absolutely gorgeous. The English dub's actually pretty good. Even Dave Bautista shows up at the parakeet at one point. He's actually pretty solid. And of course you have Mark Hamill, who shows up at one point with, I can't say who he is because it kind of goes into spoiler territory. But all these story elements really go into tell into this story that I just really connected with. Again, it's hard for me to kind of pinpoint why, because I'm not gonna, obviously my mom died, but that wasn't until a couple years ago, so I can't say that was an inciting incident, but for some reason, I guess I always just kind of felt like part of me was, I forced myself to grow up faster than I wanted to, and it felt like that is still having a big impact on me today, because it makes it hard. It's always been harder to connect with people my own age. And that was always a challenge for me growing up. I always ended up connecting with people that were older than me, especially in my late teens. And for some reason, just kind of watching, and I've been in those situations where you just kind of disconnect from life. You just disconnect from who you are, where you're just kind of floating and constantly vigilant, constantly worrying about what comes next, constantly trying to prepare for the next attack. And I love how this movie kind of captured that weird, quiet alertness that comes with that comes with that kind of trauma. And it's a lot of it's done non-verbally. And the way he kind of reconnects to his own emotions again, bit by bit, is just really fascinating and at times cathartic to watch. Especially with all the characters he meets along the way. Now, there's one part I do want to talk about, and it does go into spoiler territory, so if you haven't seen the movie yet and you plan to, please stop watching now and go watch it. It's an excellent film. I loved it. Definitely worth a watch. But there is a part where he runs into the person who created this world, who's his granduncle, who's played by Mark Hamill. And the granduncle wants him to take over managing this world, because apparently creating this world is done by stacking these magic blocks on top of each other in a very peculiar way that allows it to keep going, but if it falls over, then the world collapses. Now, on one hand, it's also just a good story about trying to find your identity and not falling into the trap that the previous generation trapped you in. This is a boy who was born from war. This is a boy who is damaged by something that his elders did. That was done by something he never had any control over. He was just forced in a situation. Just again, he's being forced in a situation now where he's asked to take over for their elders' mistakes, or their elders' shortcomings, and just said, "Hey, here, deal with this, because I don't want to deal with it anymore." And he hasn't. He has the bravery to say no to that. But on one hand, I'm also kind of curious, just from a meta-narrative standpoint, how much of this is Miyazaki talking about his relationship with his son. And it's not, I don't think it's a stretch to make that connection, because I know his son is just not a very good filmmaker. I think I've seen one or two of his films, and they just don't work in the same way that his father's work's done. So you can almost kind of feel that a similar tension here of, even though it's granduncle, there is kind of almost a father-son struggle there. Hey, this is what I want for you to do for your future, and then the child has to go, no, I want something else. This is not what I want. This is not what I need for my life. So I almost wonder in a way if this is kind of Miyazaki's way of coming to terms with that. Even though I heard he's kind of a shitty dad. I don't know the details. I don't know enough about the story. But either way, I think it's an interesting way of viewing the film as a whole. Of like, hey, I have this world of fantasy and whimsy and childlike wonder that's falling apart because I'm getting older, and it's harder to separate my adult cynicism from a childlike world. And if I don't get someone to take this over, it's gonna fall apart. And then of course you have this child going, no, I don't want this. This is not what I life. I have a life outside of this that I need to get back to. That is more important to me right now. And kind of just deal with the struggle of that, even while his own creations are floundering and failing and wanting, and frustrated by the original creator's choices. In fact, you can even argue that the parakeet king, now that I think about it, or the parakeet people in general, are kind of a surrogate for the audience, like for audience demands, or like a metaphor for audience demands. Like we want more. Like we want more. We want you to fix the damage you've done. We want you to make more of this. We want everyone to be happy. We want like more fantasy. Like we want more of this world. But we push you too hard, and we try to force it into your hands, and the whole thing comes apart. So there's a lot of interesting analysis you can make of this film, and with some beautiful, haunting imagery, particularly in terms of fires and swarms and feeling like you have no control in a sea, like almost like a sea of death, or a sea of like a sea of crawling bodies trying to consume you. I think there's one scene in particular that just fucking haunted me watching it, was when this like art pile of frogs just pile on Mojito, all saying like, join us, join us, join us, and it's fucking creepy, all while this goddamn heron just cackles like a goddamn maniac. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure this is one thing I miss about having like people talk about this stuff, and I'm gonna try to get it back later this year, but we'll see what happens. Is I miss having people to bounce off of for these opinions, because I really love to hear somebody else's thoughts on this. But as it stands, Boy and the Heron is an amazing film. I loved it. I really, really loved it. I really fell hard for this, and if you like Miyazaki's previous work, I think you will too. So I think it's all I really have to say about this. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.